Okay, who hasn't got a handout?
Oh, this is the register, I guess.
It is the register, you guessed correctly.
What is...
Just pass it to the other side. Right, advertising. To advertise, what does it mean in general, not just in media? What does advertise mean?
To make money?
In general, I said.
To advise?
Advise?
Yeah, like to promote something.
Something, like sell something, like sell your act, sell product.
Can the word advertise exist outside of a commercial setting?
Yeah. Yes.
What does it mean then?
To show something.
Yes. Animals advertise strength, power, sexuality. Yeah? You can advertise, these are very innate animal qualities. Yeah? Advertising. This is what makes advertising powerful. Yeah? Think of animal mating displays when a female is trying to attract a male or vice versa. They're very elaborate. Seduction is a form of advertising, actually. Think of it that way. Yeah? I'm not saying, you know, this is one of the main techniques of commercial advertising. Obviously, we're concerned with advertising as the main commercial aspect of mass media production that underpins most media production today, except for so-called independent media, some independent websites, blogs, and of course public service broadcasting. But even public service broadcasting, such as the BBC, is allowed to advertise its own products, just not other commercial products. So, I want you to try to remember, if you can, something that I said at the beginning of the course about structure and agency and Karl Marx. And Karl Marx, one of the most brilliant, if not the most brilliant theoretician of capitalism, he observed the birth of British industrial capitalism, but he observed the production end, yes? How mass products are produced from the production end. So consumerism, as we understand it today, and everything that we associate with consumer culture did not exist in his time. Having said that, we still use his theory to understand advertising. Yeah? But the whole notion of consumer sovereignty, of agency, is foreign to a kind of political economic Marxist analysis of commercial advertising. Advertising, to all intents and purposes, is absolutely key to creating demand, for creating a market, for creating consumer desire for products. We associate advertising with the historical development of public relations from the sort of early part of the 20th century, mid part of the 20th century, and that took off in the 1950s in America and the West. The first absolutely key point that cannot be emphasized too much is that capitalist society depends on the regulation of consumption. Okay? There is no point producing products that people do not consume. Yeah? The role of advertising is to stimulate, create demand for, basically get consumers to consume mass products, mass mediated products, so that profit can, be yielded from the production of capitalist products. Yeah? So if there's a shortfall between demand and supply, yeah, if there's an oversupply, then the role of advertising is to create more demand that meets the supply. So it's absolutely key to the functioning not only of capitalism, but particularly consumer capitalism, or what we're calling consumer culture. So this is the idea that capitalist society depends on the regulation of consumption, and production must be matched by consumption. So I mentioned the 1950s in America. The first car that was mass produced in America was this strange looking vehicle here. I think that is a Model T Ford. So the first mass produced car was a Model T Ford. And you have to imagine that in the 1950s, this was basically what you might call a full sneak. Cars didn't exist before. So not only when Ford began to produce cars and advertise its product, it was necessary to persuade consumers that driving is a desirable experience, because people had not owned cars up until the 1950s in the US. Because this was the first mass-produced car, it was utterly standardized. It was made on an assembly line, and it looked the same, and it had no variation. There was only one kind of mass-produced Model T Ford car. This is why we talk about Fordism, where Fordism just means mass production of goods. It's based on a scientific idea of management theory, yeah, that the best way to, the most economic, the most efficient way to make a product is on an assembly line, to break down every aspect of the production process into, this is what we call a division of labour, into every worker in the Ford company has a particular role to play alongside the assembly line, and just performs the same repetitive task of adding something to the car, and it just continues that way. It's a scientific idea. It's rational, yeah? So don't forget this idea that capitalism is rational is very much associated with a scientific management theory of mass production, assembly line production of goods. Obviously we're going to be talking about the mass production of media, but we're using the model of Fordism to understand it first. So, as I've said, first of all, the first experience people had of cars, people didn't have cars before. The first selling point, if you like, of the car, the Ford car, was its use value. Yeah, it was a new, faster way to travel. Yeah. Also, I think it's the idea, is it not, of you just travel with your family, so it's got a social aspect as well. So we need to understand this is probably one of the most basic Marxist terms that we need to understand advertising, and it's use value and sign value. Every product that is manufactured, every capitalist product, every commercial product has two kinds of value. First of all is its basic use. A car is for transport. The sign value is what makes it special or different from other cars. Right? So, if we continue with the historical trajectory of Ford in the 20th century, mid-20th century America, the first way that the Model T Ford was advertised was just its use value. This is an amazing piece of technology that enables people to move around at speed from A to B, and nothing else, because you didn't need to advertise anything else. There was no market, other products similar to the Model T Ford to compete with, yeah? Because at the beginning of the history of the mass production of cars, it was a monopoly. Henry Ford had a monopoly on the market. So I think you'll agree that this early ad looks rather different from ads that we have today, doesn't it? Yeah? It's got a lot of words, it's actually got sentences, but the key point to understand about this early form of advertising for Ford was that there was no sign value. There was nothing about this is what's the German Audi slogan, Vorsprung durch Technik. Yeah, there's no slogan. You don't need it. It's just this is what this product does. That was enough to convince the average American consumer to buy this particular product. So that's what happened when Ford started to mass manufacture the car. There was a huge popular excitement. Everybody who could afford a Ford bought one, which was great for the profits of Ford, but obviously in the longer term what happens is that everybody who could afford a car bought one, and therefore the demand for the Ford car went down. Yeah? So once everybody's bought a car, there's no need to buy another one. That's not good for Ford's profits. So the market became saturated. It became full up. Yeah? Everybody had a car. So this is where advertising really took off. What Ford had to do was it had to design new kinds of Ford, and also competitors to Ford had to design different kinds of car that stimulated demand for new models of goods that people already possessed. So you had to convince people that they needed an upgrade on their car, or that this car is a family car, or this car is a faster car, or this car is a more efficient car. Yeah? So we go from a standardized advertising model to a model which is called small batch customized goods, where the market is broken down into, there are different kinds of cars, and the advertising for the cars is targeted at different kinds of market. People that have money, people that are younger, and this is where sign value takes off. Sign value, I'll come back to that in a moment. So post-Fordism is when, after the saturation of the market with Model T Fords, there were new kinds of car coming onto the market that were targeted, at particular kinds of consumers. And it's also called niche markets. Niche is the French word for nest. And in sociological terms, this was a big breakthrough in this very much relates to notions of consumerism, consumer sovereignty and agency. All of a sudden, instead of the ad that we've just looked at, this one here, ads were then made or started to address consumers as individuals. So the individual became part of the style of advertising. So not only were you selling the use value, you were using psychological techniques, Freudian techniques to manipulate our unconscious minds, to actually stimulate our desire on an individual basis. How can I make everybody in this room, right, a bit like I'm trying to do now as a lecturer, listen to me individually? What can I offer that makes them want to listen to me? Not just thinking of you as one big group, but individually. How can I stimulate your individual desire to listen? Well, in this case, it's to buy cars. So I think you'll agree the transition of early use value advertising to lifestyle-oriented individualism is a rather significant one. This is the new style of ad for a Mercedes. And this is, I'm putting this forward as an example of an ad that is selling not just a car, not just the use value of the car, it's selling a lifestyle. Not only is it selling a lifestyle, it's selling desire itself. It's trying to sell a product, but it's also trying to make desire. It sells the desire for it makes the product, advertises the product, but it advertises desire itself. That sounds weird, doesn't it? But it's true. It's actually creating desire at the same time. Can you see what the words say on that ad? It says, men talk about women, sports and cars. Women talk about men inside sports cars.
So disgusting.
Well, I'm glad you said that.
When did they release this commercial?
I don't know, it's not very recent.
But it
is
looks,
Yeah, no.
It's not very recent. I would guess 10 years ago.
it's recent.
It's relative. So would that stop you consuming buying this product if you had the capital to buy it?
Yeah, if you're a feminist.
Come on, be honest.
Yeah, if you're a feminist, you'd not buy this product.
Really?
Yeah.
No.
I don't like the phrase, but the image is very appealing.
Because in a way this is exactly the point. We know it's offensive. We know there's something not right about it. But doesn't Mercedes-Benz have such sign value to drive a Mercedes? Doesn't that confer a high social status on you? Yeah? So, yeah, absolutely. That's a disgusting use of ideology right there. But at the end of the day, I just think I don't believe this had a huge negative impact on their marketing campaign. And I think that's the point. If it had done, then they wouldn't have done it. Yeah, you're going to say something, Aurora.
I feel like in this period, in 2018, it would have affected me negatively because there are many protests about sexist commercial and stuff like that. Especially with the rise of the social media, there are a lot of people going against this kind of how do you say, commercials. So now, I think that it would have a negative impact on the selling of that product.
Well, I think you're raising a really interesting point, but I think it's more complex than you're saying, because negative publicity is still publicity.
Yeah.
Actually, at the end of the day, just for your brand to be circulated with the name of your brand, and a lot of advertisers have done this in the past. They've used shock and negativity in their campaigns. They don't care whether they offend people, they just want to be remembered. Because at the end of the day, remember this, when you're consuming and you enter into the marketplace to buy a product, if you're comparing a product that you know is advertised, albeit badly, like this example, compared with something that's strange and you've never seen before that's not advertised, which one are you going to buy? There's something about the trust value, isn't there? And it's not just sign value, it's trust value. Yeah? And we also know, what else do we know about Mercedes? It's German. What do we associate with German technology? Reliability. Yeah? So, yeah, it's complex. So advertising today, post-Fordism, from the 60s and 70s onwards, promotes sign value. And sign value has become really associated with every single product in the capitalist marketplace, including political parties, including individuals, including celebrities. Celebrities have sign value. Now, it's very important to not be too negative about advertising, isn't it? Isn't it? Is it?
Just to show the both sides of the coin.
Both sides of the coin, that's exactly right. That's a lovely pluralist approach, and we like that. Yeah? So the first concept, the first good thing about advertising consumer culture is the marketing concept. And this is going to be familiar with those of you that remember what we discussed last week in the context of pluralism and political economic approaches. Market research discovers consumers' needs. So market research carried out by advertising companies and then put into the advertising campaign is giving you what you need. Right? But, sorry about the but, from a Marxist perspective, you need to ask yourself the question, is this a true need or a false need? Yeah? Which one is true, which one is false? It's very hard, isn't it, to think of a car as a false need? It is. It's very hard to think of a smartphone as a false need. It is. Yeah? That's the power of advertising. So, advertising provides information for consumers. What kind of information? It's hard for me to really support this idea, but, you know, if we go back to the two examples, yeah, maybe early advertising is better in this sense. Yeah, there's a lot of information there about the Model T Ford, isn't there? Right? More modern contemporary advertising has less information. And it's very economic information in the sense that it's not exactly the same as lying, but it's only focusing on key aspects of the product. Yeah? But it's informational. Now, the point is there a conflict between information and commercial value? It's the same question as, is there a conflict between use value and sign value? I think there is. Yeah? You know, information, this is a Frankfurt School argument, this is a Habermas argument. Information, if it's true, has to be independent. It can't just be commercial. So that's the counter argument, isn't it, to the idea that advertising provides information for consumers. How much information? What information? Is it accurate information? Is it scientific information? Think about how cigarettes were advertised in the 1930s. Yeah? Was that information, the real information that people needed to know was that smoking kills you, that tobacco and nicotine kill you. That was not part of the information campaign, and wasn't for decades until recently. So what information? So the idea, this pluralist idea, is that advertising is positive for both consumers and producers. Yeah? And I suppose it's worth pointing out that advertising, we understand force traditionally as being something physical, don't we? Coercion as physical. And the idea is that advertising is not violent. It doesn't force you to do something against your will. It's choice. You choose to consume. But then we are back to this old argument that we discussed in the context of the Frankfurt School. To what extent are we rationally in control of our minds? Yeah? It seems logical that the consumer industry wants us to think that we're rational, so that when we are buying a product, we're being rational. But Freud would have it otherwise. He would say that actually our desires are stronger than our conscious, rational selves, and therefore we're completely vulnerable. And children and young people are completely vulnerable to advertising and promotional consumer culture. Yeah? They cannot resist it. Yeah? A lot of people can't resist it. Even understanding that advertising is irrational, or that capitalism is irrational, does not stop us from participating in it, does it? It's not that simple. So then we've got a neutral approach, as follows. Nava and Nava argue that we're all media literate. Okay? So later in the course, when we talk about audiences, there's a debate between whether the media influences us, whether we are passively whether we're passive consumers of the media and ideology, as the Frankfurt School would argue, or whether we actively consume the media. This is the notion of choice again, isn't it? This is the debate between political economists and pluralists. So Marcuse, our Frankfurt School friend, says very negatively that, and I tend to agree with him, although I'd be more than happy to listen to anybody explain to me why it's not true, is that advertising actually produces false news. And this is called commodity fetishism. Fetishism is a psychoanalytic word. It's related to the unconscious mind and how we get addicted on a very, very deep unconscious level to certain products or things or people. In a sexual sense, you have a particular sexual preference, that's a fetish. So we're talking about the most primitive aspect of the human unconscious mind, and we get what advertising does. It makes us addicted to, young people are addicted to Nike, and so on and so forth. It's working on a very deep level. There is a counter-argument to the idea that consumer capitalism induces false needs. What is it? Let's hear another pluralist voice. What's the counter-argument to that?
Well, now there's the minimalist movement.
Pardon?
The minimalist movement.
What do you mean?
As in, like, you know what minimalists are? They basically, they like reduce their wardrobe, they don't buy anything new.
Oh,
They're
yeah,
usually zero waste, and it's like,
Yep.
they're kind of fighting materialistic needs.
But who's to say what's a true and a false need? Yeah? Do we accept some kind of universal, top-down definition of what's a true need or a false need? Or can we make up our own minds? Yeah? Isn't it a little bit patronizing to say, I know what your true need is, I know what the false need is for you? It's back to how the Frankfurt School create elitism. Yeah? So maybe it's not that simple. Advertising and marketing focus only on needs that can be satisfied through consumption. This is a Marxist, French Marxist theorist. Yeah? So it creates the idea that you cannot be satisfied, you cannot be less anxious. So see, one of the psychological aspects of advertising is that it creates anxiety. Yes? Not only does it stimulate desire for a product, it stimulates anxiety, and the way you feel that you can overcome your anxiety is through consumption. And this is what Lefebvre is saying. Because what happens is that it makes us feel that we can only feel better by consuming. Think about that. We can only feel better by consuming. I'm not very happy, I need to go shopping. I need to buy something. Right? We've all experienced that. Right? This is what Lefebvre is saying. Why is our therapy, what's our therapy for anxiety, why can that only be met through buying, through consumption? It's capitalism that's given us that idea. Let me show you a little bit of a clip. I'm guessing that Debbie might show this in your language classes. This is just the beginning of a documentary called Shadows of Liberty, which is about the relationship between news and advertising in the US. But it's just the beginning. It's a very good introduction, and it gives you some visual stimulation and some visual representation of the ideas that I just given. So let's just quickly take a look at this. One of the other things that we should say about advertising that I should have mentioned at the beginning of the course when I said, you know, advertising is not just in capitalism, it's also in nature, yeah, is the visual aspect. You know, Western culture at the moment is obsessed with looks, visual, youth, isn't it? The outside, forget the inside, the surface, yeah? This is a very visual-oriented culture, image-based culture. Did I show you this when we did news? Don't think so. Good. Can you tell me if I was repeating? Possible to remember.
Causing tie-ups on southbound 163 near 15.
The DEP's deputy commissioner always goes, and he says that this May 1st simply because it's old. 100 years old to be exact.
In this country, the most powerful country on earth, it is so actually difficult to get information, especially outside our borders, not to mention...
I mean, that's clearly, isn't it, a political economic view, yeah? She's saying there's a clash between information and capitalism. She's talking as an American. She's an American journalist, right?
What's going on inside this country.
4 hours and 20 minutes ago at 9:42 p.m. Eastern Time, that would have put it at 5.
Public information, the news we rely on to learn about what's happening in the world, to learn about one another, is in the hands, basically, of commercial enterprises.
An agreement on healthcare is close. What's important?
Giant media corporations like Time Warner, News Corporation, Disney, and so forth, they get to decide what is news, what is newsworthy, and what is not newsworthy.
This is America. How many of you people want to pay for your neighbor's mortgage?
What the press is pushing is distortions, lies, lack of balance.
I have 900 channels on my TV, but 700 of them are so breaking news. Tell me latest lovely stories. Thank God. Oh, look at that. She's a little more.
Yeah, we have a lot of news to tell you about. Anna Nicole Smith, who died in Florida.
We have commercially driven journalism that has no interest in poor people, but they're basically written out of the picture altogether.
So very, very important point. Why is commercially driven journalism advertising not interested in poor people?
Because they don't consume, so they just don't make them earn money.
Yeah. How do you get poor? What's the reason for poverty? Capitalism. It's the truth. So they have to hide the truth. Isn't that the purpose of advertising? Yeah? They are the byproduct of what they don't want you to see. Yeah? Poverty is the direct result of capitalism. Yeah? It's real news, it's not fake news.
And we have a system that tells us what people in power are interested in, what they want to talk about.
When was the last time, Governor, that you were at a Wendy's and had a Frosty?
Make no mistake about it. It's to control people's ideas. It's to control their imagination.
Reminded him of the general's part of this.
Imagination, unconscious. Yeah? So if you control people's ideas, you control their imagination, you can control their politics. Yeah? That is a very Frankfurt School political economic statement right now. And that guy, he's a Hollywood actor. What does he know? Hollywood is a very successful capitalist industry, isn't it? So, but he does know. He's seen it up close and personal.
We're in a profound crisis of democracy.
We're in a profound crisis of democracy. We're back to that debate, aren't we? Yeah? Is there a clash between capitalism and democracy? Or from a pluralist perspective, is the market the best mechanism for delivering democracy? This documentary clearly does not think so. Clearly.
You can't choke off discourse and have a free society.
This is what you get with corporate merit.
These are stories you will not be told on radio, in newspapers, or on television. A clash between two worlds. Big media corporations spinning public perception for profit versus the defenders of truth who stand for liberty and democracy.
Spinning public perception for profit. Do you know what that means? This word spin, what's a spin doctor?
It's like isn't it, I think there's the word written somewhere in the reading. It was someone that like fixes the image of a public figure.
Yeah, public figure or a corporation.
Yeah, or whatever, like just.
So it's a public relations consultant. Yeah. So increasingly, advertising culture, public relations culture, is pervading the whole of the Western political sphere. So everybody is more concerned about their image, hiding the truth, anything that's not attractive about them or their background or their, or their company, and you pay people to supply stories to the press that basically paint a picture of you in a more positive light. So President Assad of Syria pays Western public relations consultants because he's worried about his image. Yeah? It's not just the West that's doing this. Everybody's getting in on the act.
That's our news presenter.
When men yield up the exclusive privilege of thinking, the last shadow of liberty quits the horizon. That's like Frankfurt School. It's like when you stop thinking for yourself, then there's no liberty. There's no freedom. When you stop resisting. Back to the lecture. So, next point. According to Freud, we are the only emotion that's universal amongst all human cultures is anxiety. Do you believe that? Are we always normally anxious? Yes? 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 You see, I don't think we are, but I think we are so embedded in a culture that makes us anxious that it has become normalized, it's ideological. Because don't forget, Freud never really understood Marxism in the sense that he did not understand, he never thought about the dangers of his ideas being made commercial. Yeah? So he didn't, so what's happened to his ideas is that advertising has used his ideas to make money, but that was never what he set out to do. Marx understood that people could be less anxious in a society where they don't have to work long hours and where they are not alienated from their products. This is back to alienation. From a Marxist perspective, we can be less anxious if we are not victims, working class victims, or even, think about it, it's quite stressful to be a capitalist these days too. You know, the whole system creates anxiety. And I just want you to think about when you say we are normally and naturally anxious creatures, I don't believe, I think there's a danger of idealizing it, but I don't believe that indigenous native cultures who live in a sustainable environment, rainforests and so on, I don't think they are anxious like we are. I don't even believe that animals are as anxious as we are. We've made ourselves anxious through the Western lifestyle that we've adopted. Anyway, another way that capitalism makes us anxious is it makes us constantly insecure, not only about our appearance, but about our identity. Apparently we live in an age now of identity politics. Not social politics, identity politics. And what Dittmar argues is that our identity, or a positive sense of self, loving yourself, feeling good about yourself, has become directly dependent on our abilities to consume. Which is why, on a psychological level, there is an intense fear of poverty in Western society and an intense desire to just keep making money because it gives us a more positive sense of identity and power. Russell Belk says that consumer culture is damaging and detrimental to physical well-being and to social stability. So this is the idea that it's not a coincidence that the most advanced consumer, post-industrial, advanced countries of the world, such as America, Western European countries, have the highest incidence of mental illness and the highest incidence of crime. I'll just give you one story that happened to me this morning that I witnessed, but I immediately, because I'm a media lecturer and I think about these things, I connected it. So I was in this shopping mall in Kingston where I live, yeah? And I just walked in and there was a guy, and he wasn't English, he sounded, he was shouting, there was a lot of tension, you could tell something was going on. You think he was maybe East European. And there was a security guy sort of trying to grab him, and he had a bag, and I think it was a bag of something like a Lego box of toys. And obviously he'd just been caught shoplifting, right? I say obviously, but I think that's the natural thing to assume. And the security guy was trying to grab the bag back off of him. Okay, just in a snapshot, I could see that this was a young man who was poor, who couldn't take any more consumer messages about consumption. Christmas is coming, he's probably got children, he's probably got a child that wants a particular present, and he thought the only way he can come up with it is to steal it. Yeah? That's what consumer culture does to the human mind, especially most people who can't afford the products that are constantly advertised. Yeah? So this is what Belk is getting at. And what's also very interesting to me when you see something like that, someone shoplifting, everybody just stands still and looks. Nobody does anything, and nobody really realizes that actually it's the society that we're in that's unhealthy. What they prefer to think is, no, he's a bad person, he shouldn't have done that. We know that crime and stealing is a bad thing, but people don't steal for nothing, right? They don't steal for nothing, okay? And actually, Trump steals and gets away with it. What's the difference? Yeah? Again, but that's not the point that I want to make. So I think I've said everything that I want to say in this first of 3 lectures about advertising. Does anybody have any questions? Have I been too negative? Are you feeling depressed?
Yeah.
Go shopping then. Oh, Black Friday, of course. Thank you for reminding me. Silly me. Why didn't I think of that?
Just die here.